All right, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Behind the Mic podcast. Very happy to be with you here today. We continue on with season 2, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, among many others. Facebook is BTM Podcast Alex, Twitter, BTM Podcast _Alex. My guest today, longtime voice of the Texas Rangers, has served with the Grand Ole Opry as well, Nashville Sounds. Oh, and by the way, he might be our only podcast guest that has been on Hee Haw. Chuck Morgan, how are you?
Alex, I'm doing great. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you today, and I've been looking forward to it. So great to be with you.
Now, it started in Southern Illinois for you, correct? Take me back to that time and what some of your fondest memories are of that time of your life when you started working in the sports.
Well, when you say Southern Illinois, a lot of you folks that live up north think downstate is like Champaign or something, but no, I'm way down south. I grew up in a town called Marion,
Oh, yeah.
Illinois, not far from Carbondale, where SIU is, Southern Illinois. And my cousin was Ray Fosse, but who played for the Indians and the A's, and was a great high school star in Marion. But yeah, everything started for me in Southern Illinois.
What do you think? Or let me rephrase it this way. How often do you find yourself in hindsight looking back at those times and thinking, even if it's just recollecting a simple fun memory that you might have from that time, do you ever find yourself going back to those times mentally?
You know, Alex, almost every day, because I really think that I wouldn't trade the time that I grew up in and the people I grew up with and where I grew up, because at that particular time, the St. Louis Cardinals were very successful in the mid to late 60s. There were some great athletes that went through the high school I was in, and I was a grade school guy at the time, and I really looked up to those people. So sports really, my life revolved pretty much around sports, and I really believe that those Cardinal teams of the mid '60s really had an impact on me, and that's the reason I'm in baseball today. But yeah, I go back there all the time because they're just it was just that's where you first learned about sports from your dad and things like that. So yeah, I go back there all the time.
What was the first inspiration or people or group you looked up to want to get behind a microphone? Because I know you didn't just start in public address, but what was that first bug that said, I want to be behind a microphone?
Probably Harry Carey and Jack Buck, because they were the voices of the Cardinals back in the '60s, and Harry just I enjoyed the way he broadcast the game, and that's what I always wanted to be, was a play-by-play guy. But I did a little bit in high school when I wasn't playing, some youth league baseball type things, and some tournaments. In fact, I think there was one in Peoria at one time, a little league tournament that I went up and did the play-by-play for. And uh, yeah, I always want to be a play-by-play guy, but Harry Carey and Jack Buck were the guys that I really listened to. And then I've got also tipped my cap to the Cardinals PA guy at the time, a guy named Charlie Jones. And Charlie is kind of the inspiration behind the PA booth that I have now in this new ballpark. Charlie used to sit behind home plate at Sportsman's Park in St. Louis, and my dad said that he told me that the reason he sat there is back in the days before they electrified him, he would step onto the field with a megaphone and announce the players down each line. And once he became electrified, they just left him down there. So Charlie Jones, the PA guy at Cardinal baseball games and Cardinal football games, also had an impact on me.
I'm going to work a little further ahead in the timeline, talking about your time as a DJ. And obviously, that has served you quite well in your role with the Rangers as well. But kind of tell me about what that time was like working your way in the DJ industry, because you obviously don't poof country music large market DJ of the year. That obviously there has to be building blocks to that. So what do you think your time? How would you elaborate on your time as a DJ? I guess I would say.
Again, that was probably a lot of the way that I grew up. My mom and dad were enjoyed listening to music, and I grew up on a lot of '60s Motown and '60s music. Well, also we grew up with a lot of country music, And the other thing that my dad at the time worked for a meat company out of Tennessee that sponsored the Porter Wagoner show on weekends, and we'd gather around the TV and watch the Porter Wagoner show. And then, what's funny about that is like 10, 12 years later, I know Porter Wagoner, and he's a good friend. But I started in radio when I was 15, and I started reading the news on Sunday nights and playing records, and then it evolved into a little bit more. And then finally, I end up in Nashville by the time I'm 19, and at WSM in Nashville, and working Grand Ole Opry, and working the all night trucking show to start out. And so it really, I was a lot of the things, and you know this as well as anybody, being in the right place at the right time, those things happen for you. But having a knowledge of that music that dated back into the mid to early 60s helped out a lot. And then my interview style of interviewing people, and in that particular situation in Nashville, I was in a place where then in that era of time, people would bring their new records by the studio, and we'd play them and things like that. So my interview style it was just like we were at a diner having a cup of coffee or something, and talking about life and things like that. So it's kind of laid back, but yeah, I learned a lot. I was there at an early age and was around a lot of talented people.
Do you feel like that helped you in eventually getting a role like the one you had at the Grand Ole Opry, getting an early start at such a young age and kind of getting your feet wet before you'd kind of been established age-wise, getting into, let's say, the 20s or so?
Yeah, I think that my experience and things that I knew helped me a lot with WSM and the Grand Ole Opry. And then I just seemed to fit right into that, the people that had worked there before, and I just kind of fit into that role pretty well. And I mean, again, it was a great time, and a great place to work, and really, really special time of my life.
I would be remiss if I didn't talk at a little more length about the Grand Ole Opry. What was that time like for you? Was it when you got that, or was perhaps the time before that when you realized, hey, I've made it in this term of the DJ, the music, all that? What was that time like? Was that kind of okay, Chuck, you've made it, you're doing pretty good for yourself being the voice of such a legendary place as the Opry?
Yeah, when that was kind of the when you work at WSM at that time in Nashville, and you're doing the all night show, and that's kind of the people that worked those positions before moved into being an Opry announcer, and that was kind of the goal. And man, that was a great time. And reading commercials in front of a live audience in the Grand Ole Opry House that was carried on the radio was pretty cool. And then there were a lot of other things that came along with that. I was there at a great time at the startup of the Nashville Network, and got to host a couple of television shows there. So that Grand Ole Opry, that was a pretty special place, and will always will be to me.
Looking at that role from an announcer's perspective, I noticed something that, whether it be announcing a Texas Rangers batter in the 2010s or a guest at the Grand Ole Opry, the cadence is essentially the same. It's for the most part the same. How important do you think it's been to kind of keep that the same? And although everybody gets better as time goes on, but have you kind of found it important to stay true to yourself, as I'm sure a lot of announcers would say is one of the most important things to be?
Yeah, I got to agree with you, because in a lot of that, I guess my style was developed in the backyard in Marion, Illinois, doing playing wiffle ball games and doing the play-by-play and the PA all at the same time for these fake baseball games we did with wiffle ball and stuff. And that's where I've always felt like a guy coming up to bat or taking the stage at the Grand Ole Opry's. Probably that's a pretty special thing. And but the Grand Ole Opry helped me introduce people like that. So that helped me a lot. But the roots of that go back to when I was a kid.
The Nashville Sounds, obviously another important stage of your career. What was the world of minor league baseball like for you, and announcing to that stadium crowd there in Nashville?
Well, I was at the startup of the Sounds in 1978. I did 1978, 79, and 80. And the last couple of years I worked there, we had great teams in 1979 and 1980. But that was what really probably taught me about how to be a baseball PA announcer. It also taught me a lot about how to be a baseball promotions guy, which I wear that hat for the Rangers today, and responsible for all the giveaways and things like that. But I really learned about professional baseball behind the scenes with the Nashville Sounds, and I had a great, I guess you'd say, mentor there, Larry Schmittou, who owned the team and had coached at Vanderbilt, coached baseball at Vanderbilt. So that's where I really learned about professional baseball and the right way and the wrong way to do things. And but that was a huge help.
You were pretty established in the Nashville market. Then the decision comes along, the reach out, if you will, comes along to want to go to the Texas Rangers. As established as you were in that Nashville market, like I said, how difficult was that decision to make? Because it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Talking about your presence in the Nashville community, but you've also had a lifelong dream to work in Major League Baseball. How difficult was that decision?
It was probably the most difficult decision I've ever had to make, and because I really had some good things going in Nashville, and I've looked back a couple of times, and more, possibly I could have made the country music disc jockey Hall of Fame or something like that, which would have been fantastic. But I always loved baseball, and I really at that time looked at the my age, and I thought, okay, what am I going to be doing when I'm 50 years old? Am I still going to be playing records? Am I still going to be announcing at the Grand Ole Opry? What am I going to be doing? And I loved baseball, and I was young enough. I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. And and I was smart enough to know that I didn't that you're not going to make a living being a PA announcer in the major leagues. So I needed something else to do. So I got into the sales aspect of baseball, got involved in the promotions. And then a year later, after I went to Texas, they added a video board at Arlington Stadium. So I got involved in that production. So it's all worked out pretty good. I mean, I haven't looked back and said, oh, I should have stayed in Nashville. I've really enjoyed every bit of my time with the Rangers.
What was that process like? Because when you talk about how important the versatility of a public address announcer can be, or you could say needs to be, the Rangers being one of the first teams to get a video board there at the stadium, what was that process like? Kind of maybe not full on baptism by fire, but getting to kind of spread your wings within the first couple of your years with the Rangers.
That was it was all part of an expansion of the Arlington Stadium, where we added suites and then added this thing called, at that time, it was called Diamond Vision. And my first introduction to a Diamond Vision, I got to go to the with the anticipation of us getting that in 1984. I went to the postseason games at Dodger Stadium in 1983, and worked a little bit with the Dodgers over a weekend and watched how they handle the production of a Diamond Vision and what they did with it. And to this day, I still have my staff do things that I learned that weekend when I was in Los Angeles. But totally changed the game entertainment at Ranger games. It's totally changed game entertainment throughout sports with those video boards. But it wasn't that tough. I had edited film before and edited video, so learning all that was kind of secondhand. But it was a lot of fun, and still is to be involved with that.
I want to mention that your time with the Rangers technically wasn't your first time on the public address system at a major league stadium, getting to fill in for Bob Shepard at one point. What was that like? Obviously, you were still moderately early on in your career. Was there kind of like a moment where you had to kind of sit down, kind of take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm about to go over the public address system at Yankee Stadium? Or were you kind of, I'm ready to go, I can do this?
I can't remember a time that I've had bigger, more nasty butterflies than that day. That was, in fact, I went to Yankee Stadium the night before just to feel it out, because That was that was pretty cool, but it's also very nerve wracking. But I met Bob on Friday night and talked to him a little bit, and he said, "Well, tomorrow, if you want me to stick around, I will." And I said, "Well, that's up to you." And the next day, I did the lineups, and he introduced me over to the crowd at Yankee Stadium, and I did the lineups, and he said, "Well, do you think you're going to be okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I'm fine." He says, "I think you're going to do great." And he said, "I think I'm going to go home and read a book." So he left me in the first inning, and it was fine. But a great experience, to first of all to meet Bob Shepard was pretty cool, and to get a chance to visit with him and then do a game in Yankee Stadium, that was a very special memory.
I apologize if this question comes off as uncomfortable, but in doing my research leading up to the episode, I found this video where they said you have Roy Steele out on the West Coast, you have Bob Shepard out on the East Coast. I consider Chuck Morgan down the middle. When you had come across that, how did you balance the wow, I'm thought of that nature while also remaining humble and having the community relationship you've gotten? Was that kind of take you aback per se, or what was that like?
No, I mean that the guy that said that's my cousin Ray Fosse, and he does television analyst for the Oakland A's, and he's worked for Oakland for a long time, and he's good friends with Roy Steele, and obviously he knew Bob Shepard. But yeah, he just kind of sees me right down the middle as being the Midwest type guy. So I think that's what Ray was talking about.
Looking at your time with the Rangers, more bigger picture, and man, I was thinking about I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the Grand Ole Opry. I might be even more remiss if I don't talk about its baseball time in Texas. Where did that come from, and when did you realize, okay, this is like part of Rangers lore? It's time for, like, was that kind of a moment for you, or what was that process like?
We had a play-by-play man named Mark Holtz when I first came to the Rangers in 1983, and Mark did radio play-by-play with Eric Nadel, and they were a great team, similar to Jack Buck and Harry Carey. They did a great job broadcasting Rangers baseball, and then Mark switched over to television before he passed away, and Mark would always come on the air with the radio or TV and says, "Hey, it's baseball time in Texas," and as a tribute to Mark, because he passed away in 1997, I thought, you know what, I'm going to carry that forward. And so from 1997 on, before every Ranger game, I've said it's baseball time in Texas, and it's kind of caught on now. It's similar. I know I just got finished with the World Series and some Dodger playoff games, and the big thing with the Dodgers, it's time for Dodger baseball, and I would do that here, and the Dodger fans would roar. So it's baseball time in Texas is similar to that. It's not as big as that, but that's how that came about. It's still a tribute to one of the great broadcasters in baseball history, Mark Holtz.
No doubt. And looking at how you get ready for a Ranger game, and going back to talking about how versatile of a role you have with the Rangers, the different hats you wear, what does a typical Ranger game day look like for you? How busy are you? Is there even a significant, if at all, time for rest with the number of hats that you have for the franchise?
It's kind of like I tell everybody, it's kind of like building a sports cast or a newscast for television or radio. And I come in about 9:30 on the day of a game. Whether if it's a day game, I'm in a little bit earlier. But for a night game, I get in about 9:30, and I start building a program log similar to what a radio disc jockey would use to follow with commercials and things like that. So I build a program log, and for each thing that we have to take care of, whether it's a sponsorship thing or features we want to do during the game for fans, welcome military heroes or anything like that. So the first thing I do in the morning is build that log, and then the rest of the day we spend the day building that program. So the goal is to be ready by the time the team comes out for stretching around 4:10, and then by that time we're ready to go before the gates open at 5. So it's a full day of of preparation, and you get hit from a lot of departments. The community department might want something done, or the baseball department might want something announced, or welcome somebody, things like that. So we make sure we cover all those bases. But and obviously we got to take care of the sponsors most of all. So it's a full day, and as games used to be when I first got into Major League Baseball, games were about 2 hours 15 minutes, and now they're anywhere from 3 to 4 hours, and so it's a long day. But I tell everybody, hey, I come to work at a ballpark every day, and there's nothing wrong with that.
For sure. And you've obviously gotten to also announce some championship type moments with the World Series appearances by the Rangers, and then this unique World Series here in 2020. What was that like when you found out that the World Series would be at Globe Life Field, and then second, that you'd have the role that you did? Was that a Major League Baseball thing? Was that a Rangers thing? How was that process like to get another World Series under your belt?
The around the last week of August, we have a weekly meeting with ownership, and they had teased the fact that last week of August that, hey, there's a possibility that Major League Baseball may have the postseason in a bubble, and we may be hosting games here at Globe Life Field, and they've even talked about this being the where the World Series would be. So I knew pretty much a month in advance before anything happened, what we would probably be doing, and it wasn't shortly after that we started having weekly Zoom calls with Major League Baseball game presentation people, and that's how it happened. And it was an interesting experience, and it was a lot of fun. Getting to see the National League teams, and then the World Series was great. I tell everybody now, I hope I never have to do that again, because if we have to do that again, that means things are still mixed up with the virus and things. And if we don't have to do it, it means things are getting closer to normal. But the toughest part of that was to remember who the home team was. There were some days, especially in the championship series, we didn't have any days off, so there would be a day where, okay, it's a Dodger home game, and then the next day it's an Atlanta Braves home game. That was the toughest thing, to make sure that we made each team feel like they were home. But it was a great experience and a lot of fun, and it was a real joy to watch the World Series again.
Obviously, there's so much uncertainty with the COVID-19 pandemic, and you talk about how you hope you never have to announce in that unique, obviously not in a good way, of an atmosphere with the pandemic and such. What do you think that atmosphere will be like when you can finally get back in the PH here for a Ranger home game? I'm sure that's crossed your mind probably a couple times at least, right?
Yeah, and the one thing that we learned, being in a new ballpark, the one thing we learned is how loud this ballpark has a chance to be. We only had 11,000 people allowed at the postseason games, and it was very loud. And I kept thinking every game that the Dodger fans were very loud, the Rays fans were loud, Braves were. And I was thinking to myself, how loud this ballpark will be when there's 40,000 people here, and really look forward to that, because it was a tough year. I mean, not having any fans here. I mean, a ballpark and ball games are built to have fans in the seats, and it was strange, but we have a chance to have a real home field advantage here with how loud this park can be.
Looking at the term public address announcer in general, I had asked you about your preparation for a Texas Ranger ball game. I feel like it's announcing 101 to say, if an announcer is not prepared, and that this is the way I phrased it with Alan Roach last episode, if an announcer is not prepared, it's going to show more than likely over the microphone. How important do you see preparation in the process for a public address announcer?
Oh, it's real important, and you're exactly right. If you're not prepared, the people are going to know. And again, that's my goal every day, is to be ready by 4 o'clock before anybody's in here. I've got the scripts written. I like to write my own scripts because I know, my pace and what I want to say, and sometimes what sounds like me. Sometimes you'll have ad agencies or something will write copy. Well, I say, well, that doesn't sound like me. Here's what I would say. So I write my own scripts, but again, I like to be ready by that 4 o'clock mark for a 7:05 game. I also, during Major League Baseball playoff games, we had 2 or 3 rehearsals, which helped out a lot, whether it was the Stand Up to Cancer event or the introduction of the players, something like that. Everything was rehearsed, and we were more than ready. I mean, the Stand Up for Cancer thing, we probably went through that about 4 or 5 times before everybody had work. And they also bring in the Fox camera guys, and they get their cameras set. So yeah, but if you're not prepared, it's going to show up over the PA system pretty quick.
Obviously, you've been able to have some form of a schedule with the pandemic, but one thing that comes with a normal schedule is the aspect of voice health. How do you look at that? And obviously, there's different announcers that say, oh, well, I might use throat lozenges, or, oh, I might make this little tea concoction. Where do you stand on when it comes to voice health for a public address announcer? Do you think they need to take these extra steps, or do you think it's just, go with the flow and maybe take a break if the voice gets a little meh?
I've never really had a problem with that. And I tell everybody I probably do more harm than good to my voice. So, smoke a cigar every now and then and drink a shot of whiskey every now and then, or tequila. So I've never had any problem. The good Lord blessed me with a great voice, and I've had it since I was 4 or 5 years old, as the neighbors back in Marion would tell you that they knew when I was outside playing. And I've been very fortunate. I've never had an issue where that I've had any type of health problem with my voice or anything like that. I take good care of myself and get plenty of sleep. And the thing that I've noticed is usually the first game, if the team's been gone for 9 or 10 days, it takes me about 3 or 4 announcements to get back to where I feel like I sound right. So, but I've never really had an issue with anything like that. And like I say, I probably do more harm than what I do. Everything you're not supposed to do.
Yeah. And kind of rolling off of that, and unfortunately, we do have to close at some point. I'd love to be able to talk to you for 24 hours, to be quite frank, but you've obviously established the longevity when it comes to public address. That being said, as long as you've had this position, what makes it so fun? Because you can clearly tell you have fun doing that job. And first of all, to anybody listening, that should be something that's repeated over and over again. If you're having fun doing what you do, you're in the right place. And I feel like that kind of works the same way for you. You can truly tell that you have fun with it. But what makes it so fun?
What makes it so fun is first of all, I love baseball. I love watching the game. That's the best part. And I come to work at a ballpark every day, and I always say, I call it work. I mean, it's a lot of fun just to get prepared for a game and things like that. And then, at the just before the game starts, I always remind myself, hey, I'm getting to watch a Major League Baseball game for free tonight. So it's the ball games that I enjoy the much. It's so much. It's the players that I get to see. I mean, just the things that I saw in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I saw more great catches in the last 2 or 3 weeks than I've seen in 25 years. And you always see something that you've never seen before. And then the other part is when the first night I was at the Grand Ole Opry, the king of country music, Roy Acuff, brought me into his dressing room, and he said, hey, if you'll be good to those fans out there, they'll be good back to you. And I've never forgotten that. And I love meeting fans and talking baseball with fans. So I enjoy that. So everything, all of that rolled up is the fun part of it. But at 7 o'clock when the game starts, that's the best time of day for me.
Well, before we let Chuck go, and like I said earlier, I had alluded to, unfortunately, we do have to Part ways here, Facebook, BTM Podcast, Alex, Twitter, BTM Podcast, _Alex, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Anchor, among others. We stay in Major League Baseball next episode with the voice of the New York Yankees, Paul Olden. So be tuned in for that. And Chuck, you say you like to talk to the fans. You got one right here. Thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Alex, I appreciate it very much. I've enjoyed it, and look forward. Maybe sometime you can get down here to Texas and catch a ball game. I look forward to seeing you. But this was great, and I appreciate the time very much.
Same as here.